Welcome back to Final Trade. I wanted to do an update on the Suicide deck that I featured a couple months ago and kind of how it's evolved since then. I've changed a lot of things around trying to find kind of the right balance between that, hand destruction, land destruction, creature destruction, so those portions of like the disruption side of these type of decks, and then the aggro side of the creatures, trying to find really, what's the right mix. And I've had a lot of consternation about this. I play it a lot. My wife and I play against each other, typically Sly decks against this, or White Weenie against this, or Senior Stompy against this. So a lot of aggro on aggro type matchups. And I feel like I'm not understanding the deck, and like my particular version is too unfocused. And I'll tell you exactly where I think that's happening. The Bad Moon, I feel like that's probably not the best thing. I used to have four, maybe I should go to zero. I'm at two now. But the reason I don't really like it is you have stuff like the Phyrexian War Beast. Well, he's an artifact creature, so he doesn't get the effect of the Bad Moon. Also, when you go to more of this disruption style of a suicide deck, you have more cards like Cabal Therapy and Duress to force your opponent to discard. And so fewer of your cards in your deck are even creatures to potentially get the benefit of the Bad Moon. Also, the terror, the kind of problem I see with that is that it's more of a reactive card. Your opponent has to play a creature, and then you need to react to it to make terror worthwhile. And so it feels like this deck should be more in the driver's seat, aggressive. And so I'm not really sure if that's a great card in here. And also, when you play in a heavy aggro environment, you can just throw out terror after terror. I mean, if you had 10 terrors, it wouldn't be enough against a Sly deck or a White Weenie deck. They have more creatures than you can ever deal with. So I don't know. Another issue that I kind of have playing this deck is the overall mana curve is a little high for a fast aggro deck. So, you've got 4 3-mana creatures. You got the 4-mana Scuda with the kicker ability. You got the 5-mana Hatred. So you kind of have some high casting cost things, which really hurts Curse Scroll. It's really hard to use Curse Scroll effectively in a deck where you're holding on to cards because you simply don't have the mana to cast them. And because your hand is still a mixed up bunch of cards because you can't cast them. So neither do you have the mana to activate the Curse Scroll, nor do you have a small enough hand to make it work effectively. So then the other problem I have is the Flesh Reaver. Obviously, in a aggro heavy meta environment, Flesh Reaver sometimes just gets completely locked down and is useless. So I'm not really sure. I've kind of thought about things like, pulling out the Terrors and the Bad Moons and the Flesh Reavers and replacing them with more Hatreds, because that's kind of supposed to be the kill card, but in all these games, it very rarely comes up that Hatred is what wins the game for you, even when there were 4 copies in the deck. And so I'm not really sure. It feels so unfocused. And, I've gone back and I've read and reread the famous 3 or 4 part series on suicide decks that was written sometime around, I guess, like 2004. It's on some old message board. And it's just like the seminal work of history and building of suicide decks up to that point in time. And there's a lot of stuff represented here that's talked about in that work, but I don't know, I feel like I can't understand the point of this deck well enough to make it work really well. When I played this in high school, I used a lot of stuff like the Sarcomancy, but I also had Carnophage, I had Black Knight, I had 4 Bad Moons, obviously I had 4 Dark Rituals because it's a black deck. I don't remember how many Cursed Scrolls I played, but it was a much different mix because of the availability of cards, both to me and cards that existed at the time in 1997. And so it was a totally different creature of a deck back then. So if you have any suggestions, any inputs, I'd like to hear them in the comments. It's still a really fun deck to play, and it's fun against things like Sly. I think Sly versus Suicide is like the quintessential pre-modern Magic matchup. They were both great fast aggro decks at the time. They were both world championship caliber, and they both play in a very fun way for their respective colors. And it makes for a great matchup where sometimes Sly can just win quickly on brute force, but if it gets dragged into a longer game, then Suicide can take the win. And so it's a lot of fun to play with in that kind of environment. So let me know what you think. I'd like to hear it in the comments. If you like this kind of thing, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade. Thanks.